Stop calling me. I am in a very important meeting right now, and you are ruining my focus. My husband hissed those words into his cell phone, his voice dripping with irritation and fake authority. I slowly lowered my phone from my ear. I did not say a word. I did not scream or cause a scene. I just sat perfectly still in the velvet booth of the Waldorf Astoria lobby bar, watching him. He was not in a boardroom. He was not looking at blueprints or negotiating a commercial real estate deal. He was walking right through the grand revolving doors of the hotel. And he was not alone. His left hand was holding a designer leather duffel bag, and his right hand was casually tucked into the back pocket of his 24-year-old assistant, Sasha. My name is Zoe. I am 32 years old, and up until that exact second, I thought I was in a happy, secure marriage. If you have ever felt the floor drop out from under you because family or someone you loved completely betrayed your trust, hit the like button and subscribe. You are going to want to hear every single detail of how I handled this, because I promise you, revenge is best served with a flawless financial strategy. Before I get into the rest of the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I took a slow sip of my martini. The ice-cold gin burned the back of my throat, forcing me to snap out of my initial shock. I had been married to DeAndre for 7 years. 7 years of standing by him while he climbed the corporate ladder. 7 years of listening to his inflated ego. Today was our anniversary. I had secretly canceled a multi-million-dollar private equity merger meeting in New York, a meeting that I had spent 6 months preparing for, just so I could catch an early flight back to Atlanta. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to show up at his office with reservations at his favorite steakhouse. Instead, I had tracked his location through our shared family app, thinking he was at a work lunch, only to find him checking into a luxury suite with a girl who barely knew how to format a basic document. I watched them approach the reception desk. DeAndre leaned against the marble counter, flashing that signature $1 million smile. The same smile that had charmed me when we first met in college. Back then, he was driven and ambitious. Now, at 35 as a senior director of commercial real estate, he was just arrogant. He wore tailored Italian suits and constantly reminded everyone around him that he was the primary breadwinner. He loved playing the role of the traditional powerful husband who took care of his quiet, unassuming wife. His mother, Brenda, had raised him to believe that men were the undisputed kings of their households, and that a woman's only real value was how well she could keep a home and support her man. DeAndre had internalized every bit of that toxic mindset. For years, I played along. I let him take the credit for our beautiful home, our luxury vacations, and our stable life. I dimmed my own light so he could shine brighter, thinking that was what a supportive wife was supposed to do. He always told his friends that I was just a low-level financial consultant who worked from home in my pajamas. He thought my days consisted of balancing simple spreadsheets for local mom and pop shops. He liked it that way. It made him feel big. It made him feel like the absolute ruler of our $2.5 million mansion in Buckhead. What DeAndre did not know, and what he was too self-absorbed to ever figure out, was that I was not just balancing spreadsheets. I was the silent majority partner of one of the most aggressive private equity firms on the East Coast. While he was out buying expensive watches to look wealthy, I was quietly acquiring companies and building generational wealth. In fact, my firm was currently in the final stages of a hostile takeover of his entire corporate division. He was literally working for me, and he had absolutely no idea. Sasha giggled loudly, pulling my attention back to the present. She tossed her long weave over her shoulder and leaned into him. She was wearing a tight silk dress and carrying a handbag that cost more than her annual salary. A handbag I instantly recognized because DeAndre had told me the charge on our credit card was for a client appreciation gift. He had actually used the joint account, the one I quietly funded with my own dividends, to buy his mistress a $5,000 purse. The audacity was almost impressive. My chest tightened, but I refused to cry. Crying was for women who did not have a plan. I had an empire. I watched the receptionist hand DeAndre his room keys. He whispered something in Sasha's ear, making her blush, and then they headed toward the gold-plated elevators. The doors slid open, they stepped inside, and they were gone. I sat there for another 20 minutes. I let the reality of the situation wash over me. He had looked me in the eye this morning, kissed my forehead, and told me he had to go out of town for a sudden site inspection. He told me he was sorry to miss our anniversary dinner, but promised to make it up to me. The betrayal was so calculated, so effortless, that it made me sick to my stomach. He had probably done this a dozen times before. The late nights at the office, the sudden weekend conferences, the unexplained hotel charges he always managed to brush away as business expenses. I signaled the bartender and paid my tab, leaving a generous tip. I smoothed down the fabric of my tailored suit, picked up my briefcase, and walked purposefully across the lobby toward the concierge desk. The head concierge, a refined older gentleman named Thomas, immediately stood up straight as I approached. Thomas wore a perfectly tailored burgundy uniform and had the kind of discreet professionalism that money could not buy. Being a Diamond 5 IP member of the hotel group came with its perks, and Thomas knew exactly who I was from my frequent business stays. "Good afternoon, Ms. Zoe," Thomas said, with a warm, respectful nod. "It is always a pleasure to see you. How can we assist you today? Would you like me to arrange a private car for your evening?" "Hello, Thomas," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I do not need a reservation today. I just need a small favor. I need one of your premium security envelopes, the thick black ones, and a private piece of stationery." "Of course, right away," he said, pulling out a heavy textured card and a sleek black envelope from his desk drawer. He handed me a gold fountain pen. I stood at the polished wood counter and stared at the blank card. I did not write a tearful letter. I did not write a long paragraph about how much he had hurt me. I was completely done with him. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper that my lawyers had drafted just days prior regarding his corporate accounts. It was a document that would single-handedly destroy his fragile ego and his bank account. I folded the document perfectly, placed it inside the card, and slipped both into the black envelope. I sealed it tightly and wrote his name on the front in bold, clear letters. DeAndre. I handed the envelope back to Thomas, sliding a crisp $100 bill across the counter along with it. Not as a bribe, but as a token of appreciation for his absolute discretion. "My husband just checked into one of the penthouse suites," I said calmly. "He is scheduled to check out tomorrow morning. I need you to personally guarantee that this envelope is handed directly to him the moment he walks up to this desk to settle his bill. Not a minute before and not a minute after." Thomas gracefully slid the envelope and the bill into the lockbox beneath his register. He did not blink, did not ask why a wife was leaving a mysterious black envelope for a husband who was staying in a suite with another woman. "You have my absolute word, Ms. Zoe," Thomas assured me. "It will be the very last thing he receives before he leaves our establishment." "Thank you, Thomas," I said, offering a polite smile. "Have a wonderful evening." I turned on my heel and walked out of the grand lobby. The warm Atlanta air hit my face as the valet brought my car around. I slid into the driver's seat of my Porsche, a car DeAndre constantly complained was too flashy for a quiet woman like me, and started the engine. The powerful roar of the exhaust echoed in the valet tunnel. I did not drive to our house in Buckhead. I did not want to be surrounded by the custom furniture, the imported rugs, and the life we had built on his lies. I did not want to look at the photos of us smiling on the mantel. Instead, I drove straight to my private office downtown, a sleek minimalist space on the 40th floor that DeAndre had never even visited because he thought it was just a rented co-working desk. As I navigated the evening traffic, my mind was running through 100 different financial scenarios. DeAndre thought he held all the power in our marriage. He thought I was completely dependent on his income and his status. He had built his entire identity around being the big man, the provider, the boss. But he was about to learn a very brutal lesson about the difference between looking rich and actually having power. I picked up my phone and dialed my lead attorney. He answered on the second ring. "Zoe," he said, his voice laced with surprise. "I thought you were taking the weekend off for your anniversary. Did the flight back to Atlanta go smoothly?" "The flight was fine, but there is a change of plans," I replied, my voice steady and cold. I want you to initiate the full forensic audit on DeAndre's commercial division immediately. Wait, immediately. The lawyer paused for a moment. Are you sure about this? That is going to cause a massive earthquake at his firm right before our buyout is finalized. The board might panic. Let them panic, I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I merged onto the highway. I am positive. Every expense report, every client lunch, every hotel stay, and every corporate gift charge for the past 3 years. I want it ripped apart line by line. I want to know exactly how much company money he has been funneling into his personal life. Understood. I will get the accounting team on it right now. And freeze the secondary accounts. I added my tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. All of them. By the time he checks out of his hotel tomorrow morning, I want his corporate credit cards declining at the front desk. It will be done within the hour, Zoe. Have a good night. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The sun was beginning to set over the city skyline, casting long, dark shadows across the glass buildings. DeAndre was currently upstairs in a luxury suite drinking champagne and celebrating his clever little affair. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had won. But as I watched the city lights flicker on, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of calm. The tears never came, only pure, unadulterated focus. DeAndre was about to walk out of that hotel tomorrow morning with a sleek black envelope in his hand. And the moment he opened it, his entire world, his career, his money, and his arrogant pride was going to collapse right in front of him. He told me to stop calling him because he was in a meeting. Well, he was right about one thing. He was definitely about to face the most important meeting of his life. And I was the one setting the agenda. The next morning, I sat at the massive marble kitchen island of our Buckhead mansion. I was dressed in a pristine white silk blouse and tailored slacks, my hair perfectly slicked back into a low bun. I slowly stirred my black coffee, listening to the quiet hum of the state-of-the-art refrigerator. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the expensive imported rugs and custom artwork that decorated the open-concept living space. It was the perfect picture of domestic wealth and stability. At exactly 9:45, my phone vibrated. A single text message lit up the screen from an unknown number. Delivery completed. Have a wonderful day, Ms. Zoe. Thomas had kept his word. The black envelope was now in DeAndre's hands. 10 minutes later, the screech of tires echoed through the quiet tree-lined street. DeAndre drove his Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon over the manicured lawn, leaving deep, muddy tire tracks in the pristine grass before slamming on the brakes inches from the garage door. The heavy mahogany front door flew open so violently that it slammed against the foyer wall, rattling the antique mirror hanging above the console table. DeAndre stormed in his chest, heaving his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was still wearing the same tailored Italian suit from the hotel lobby, but the tie was ripped off, and his shirt collar was unbuttoned, exposing a faint smudge of Sasha's cheap vanilla-scented lotion on his neck. In his right hand, he had crumpled the sleek black envelope. He marched past the entryway console table and aggressively swiped his arm across it. A heavy imported crystal vase, a wedding gift from my late grandmother, crashed to the hardwood floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. Water and white lilies splashed across the polished wood. I did not flinch. I took another sip of my coffee and looked at the mess on the floor. You are going to pay the housekeeper extra to clean that up, I said, my voice barely above a whisper laced with absolute indifference. Are you out of your mind? He roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He marched into the kitchen and slammed the crumpled black envelope onto the marble island right next to my coffee mug. You think you are smart, Zoe? You think you can hire some cheap private investigator, stalk me at my hotel, and send anonymous threats about my expense reports to my company? You think you can destroy my career because you are a bitter, jealous woman? So he assumed I was just a scorned wife trying to tattle on him to his superiors. He thought the notice of investigation was a petty revenge tactic I had cooked up with a local lawyer. He had absolutely no idea that I was the superior he was so desperately afraid of. I let him continue his rant, observing his frantic movements like a scientist studying a cornered rat in an experiment. I am a senior director, he spat. pointing a shaking finger at my face, stepping closer so I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. I bring in millions of dollars for that firm. Do you honestly think the board of directors cares about a few misallocated funds or a hotel suite? I am untouchable. I am the face of the commercial real estate division. And instead of asking yourself why your husband is in a hotel with a beautiful, vibrant 24-year-old, you pull a stunt like this. You try to ruin the man who feeds you. He paced back and forth across the kitchen, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the stray glass shards he had tracked in from the hallway. He was trying to regain control of the narrative using the exact same gaslighting tactics his mother Brenda had taught him. Attack the victim, shift the blame, make the woman feel like she is the one who failed the marriage. He was terrified, but his massive ego would never allow him to show it. Instead, he channeled that fear into pure venomous rage aimed directly at my character. "Let me tell you exactly why I was at the Waldorf Astoria last night," he sneered, leaning his heavy frame over the island to get right in my face. "Because I am suffocating in this house. Look at you. You are a frigid, boring spreadsheet reader. You sit in your little home office all day in your sweatpants, crunching numbers for small-time local businesses, making absolute pennies while I carry the entire weight of this family on my back. When I come home from crushing deals in the boardroom, I want a woman who appreciates my greatness. I want excitement. I want passion and energy. You are a lifeless robot, Zoe. You never want to go out to the clubs. You never want to show off our wealth. You just sit here reading books and looking at screens. It is your fault I had to find a real woman to make me feel alive." I looked at him completely unbothered by his pathetic attempt to break my spirit. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to scream and throw plates at him so he could call me crazy and justify his betrayal. I gave him nothing but a cold, flat stare. "A real woman?" I asked, calmly raising one eyebrow. "You mean an oversized child who lets you buy her affection with my money? You mean an assistant who cannot even format a PDF without asking the IT department for help?" His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The vein in his forehead pulsed rapidly. He slammed his fist onto the marble counter, making my coffee mug jump. "It is my money," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I earned every single dime that comes into this household. I put the roof over your head. I bought the clothes on your back. I paid for that car in the driveway. And I am done letting you drag me down. You think you are entitled to the fruits of my labor just because you wear my ring?" He pulled his phone from his pocket, jabbing his thumb against the screen with aggressive, jerky movements. "I want a divorce," he demanded, his voice turning ice cold and cruel, dripping with absolute malice. "And I am not giving you a single cent. You think you can threaten my job? I will ruin you. I am calling the bank right now. Every supplementary credit card in your wallet is officially deactivated. The Platinum card, the Visa, the checking account, all of them. Done. Cut off. Welcome to the real world, Zoe." He paused, breathing heavily, waiting for the impact of his words to hit me. He expected me to fall to my knees. He expected me to apologize for pushing him away, to beg him to forgive me for ruining our anniversary. He wanted me to plead for my financial life, terrified of being thrown out into the streets of Atlanta with no income and nowhere to go. He thrived on the power dynamic he had meticulously constructed over the last 7 years. "You are going to walk out of here with exactly what you brought into this marriage, Zoe. Absolutely nothing. I am the sole provider here. I am the king of this castle. You are just a guest who overstayed her welcome. I will have my lawyer draft the separation papers by tomorrow morning. You have until the end of the week to pack your cheap little clothes and get out of my house. And if you ever try to contact my office or send another threatening letter again, I will drag your name through the mud so badly you will not even be able to get a job working the register at a fast food joint." He turned around, straightening his ruined collar, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity and authority he had left. He puffed out his chest, completely convinced he had just delivered the ultimate death blow to my life. He thought cutting off my access to his bank accounts would leave me destitute and begging for scraps. He thought his booming voice and aggressive posturing had successfully put me back in my place. But as he marched up the grand, sweeping staircase to take a shower and wash off the evidence of his infidelity, I just smiled and picked up my coffee mug again. The coffee was lukewarm now, but it tasted sweeter than ever. He had just declared war and proudly cut what he believed were my only supply lines. He felt so big and so powerful. What DeAndre did not know was that the supplementary credit cards he just furiously canceled were linked to an allowance account I had stopped using 3 years ago. His impressive corporate salary was nothing but pocket change compared to the massive dividends I pulled in weekly from my private equity investments. And as for his arrogant threats of divorce and kicking me out of my own home, he had absolutely no idea that the deed to this magnificent $2.5 million Buckhead mansion was not in his name. It belonged to a blind holding company, a limited liability corporation that I completely owned and operated behind the scenes. I had let him pay the mortgage from his account to stroke his massive ego, essentially letting him pay me rent to live in my house. He was kicking me out of a property I legally owned, using money I had already replaced 100 times over to defend a corporate position he was about to lose to me. I took a final sip of my coffee, feeling a dangerous thrill run through my veins. The trap was set perfectly. Now all I had to do was let his toxic family dig the grave a little deeper. The very next morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy mahogany front door clicked open. I was sitting in the formal living room reviewing the preliminary audit files my legal team had securely forwarded to my tablet. I did not even have to look up to know who was invading my sanctuary. The loud, obnoxious click-clack of cheap heels on my imported hardwood floors announced the arrival of my mother-in-law Brenda and my sister-in-law Keisha. They had always abused the emergency spare key I foolishly gave them years ago, but today they marched in with the coordinated energy of a military strike team. "Where is she?" Brenda's booming voice echoed through the foyer. I calmly locked my tablet and set it on the glass coffee table. I stood up and smoothed the front of my emerald green dress. "I am right here, Brenda," I said, my voice projecting a quiet authority that usually irritated her. Brenda stomped into the living room, dragging her oversized knockoff designer purse against my pristine white sofa. She was a woman who wore too much heavy perfume and believed volume equaled power. Right behind her was Keisha chewing a piece of gum so loudly it sounded like a snapping rubber band. Keisha was 30 years old, chronically unemployed, and funded entirely by the credit cards DeAndre handed out to buy his family's loyalty. I expected Brenda to at least pretend to be a neutral party. After all, her son had just been caught having a public affair. But Brenda did not come to offer sympathy. She came to deliver the executioner's blow. "Do not you stand there and look at me with that arrogant face," Zoe Brenda snapped, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "DeAndre called me last night. He told me everything. He told me how you have been neglecting him, how you sent some vicious threat to his company, and how he is finally divorcing you. And honestly, it is about time." I crossed my arms, resting my weight on one leg. "So your son gets caught in a hotel with a 24-year-old assistant, and you rush over here to tell me it is about time. Do not you dare judge my son," Brenda snarled, stepping closer. "DeAndre is a king. He is a provider. He works 80 hours a week, building a massive career, bringing home millions of dollars to keep you living in luxury. What do? You sit in the house. You read your little books. You do not go out. You do not network with the other wives. And worst of all, you do not fulfill your most basic duty as a woman." She paused, letting a cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. "You have been married to my son for 7 years, Zoe. 7 years and my grandbaby's room is still empty. You are barren. You are a cold, empty house of a woman. A man like DeAndre needs a legacy. He needs an heir to leave his empire to." She leaned in, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice. "And that sweet girl Sasha, she is giving him exactly what you could not. She is 4 months pregnant, Zoe. She is carrying my first grandson, a boy, a real heir to the family name." The revelation hung in the air. DeAndre had not mentioned a pregnancy last night. He was too busy panicking about his bank accounts and his ego. But Sasha being pregnant, that explained why he was suddenly so reckless, so willing to blow up his entire life for an assistant. He wanted to play the patriarch. He wanted the perfect picture of a powerful man with a young, fertile woman by his side. If I were the helpless, dependent wife they thought I was, that news would have destroyed me. It would have sent me to the floor in a puddle of tears. Brenda was watching my face, eagerly waiting for the breakdown. She wanted to see me shatter. Instead, I simply nodded. I see. Well, congratulations, Brenda. I am sure Sasha will make a fascinating addition to your family dinners. Brenda looked taken aback by my lack of emotion. Her face flushed with anger. You are unnatural, she spat. You have no heart. That is exactly why my son is kicking you out to the curb. He is bringing Sasha here to live in this house. The house my son bought, the house my son pays for. You do not belong here anymore. While Brenda was delivering her venomous speech, I realized Keisha had slipped away. I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps upstairs coming directly from my master bedroom. Excuse me, I said, stepping around Brenda and walking toward the grand staircase. Where do you think you are going? Brenda demanded, trailing right behind me. We are not done talking. We are completely done talking, I replied, taking the stairs two at a time. I reached the second floor and walked straight down the hallway to my massive walk-in closet. The sight waiting for me would have been comical if it were not so deeply pathetic. Keisha was standing in the middle of my custom cedar closet, holding a giant black plastic trash bag. She had already pulled half of my designer handbags off the shelves. My vintage Chanel flaps, my limited edition Hermes Kelly the Prada totes I used for business travel, they were all being carelessly tossed into the garbage bag, like discarded laundry. She was currently holding a pair of red-bottom Christian Louboutin heels, inspecting them with greedy eyes, before tossing them in with the bags. What exactly are you doing, Keisha? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Keisha jumped slightly, dropping a Gucci belt to the floor, but she quickly recovered, plastering a nasty, entitled smirk on her face. She kicked the belt toward the trash bag. I am helping you pack. Keisha, said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. DeAndre said you have to be out by the end of the week. But honestly, you do not need any of this stuff where you are going. What is a broke single woman going to do with a Birkin bag? You are going to be living in some cramped little apartment on the bad side of town. You will look ridiculous. She turned back to the shelves and grabbed a stack of my silk scarves. Besides, she sneered, tossing them into the bag. My brother bought all of this for you. His hard-earned money paid for these shoes and these bags. Since you are leaving, this stuff stays with the family. I will take the bags, and whatever I do not want we will give to Sasha. She actually has a man to dress up for. I looked at the black trash bag bulging with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of luxury accessories. Accessories that I had purchased with my own private equity dividends. DeAndre had never bought me a single designer item in his life. His idea of a luxury gift was a gift card to a department store that he charged to our joint account. Every single item Keisha was stealing had been paid for by my wealth. I could have stopped her. I could have called the police right then and there and had them both arrested for burglary. I could have pulled up the digital receipts on my phone and proved that I owned every thread of clothing in that room. But as I watched Keisha's greedy, desperate hands clawing at my possessions, a much better idea formed in my mind. They wanted to steal from me. Let them. Let them take the bags. Let them take the shoes. Let them firmly establish a documented pattern of theft and entitlement. When the federal auditors finished ripping apart DeAndre's life, every single asset in this family would be scrutinized. By taking my property, Keisha was unknowingly tying herself to a sinking ship. Take them, I said smoothly. Keisha stopped mid-reach, her hand hovering over a diamond tennis bracelet sitting on my vanity. She turned to look at me, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. What did you say? I said, take them, I repeated, stepping into the closet and waving my hand dismissively at the trash bag. Take the bags, take the shoes. If you are that desperate to wear my hand, me downs, be my guest. Like you said, I will not be needing them for my next chapter. Brenda shoved her way past me into the closet, looking from me to the trash bag. You hear that, Keisha? She knows she is beaten. She knows she does not have a leg to stand on. Brenda looked at me with pure disgust. You are finally showing some respect for my son's money. Grab the jewelry box too, Keisha. Do not leave her anything of value. I watched in absolute silence as my sister-in-law gleefully stuffed my diamond earrings and pearl necklaces into her cheap purse. They were acting like scavengers picking over a carcass. They felt so incredibly powerful, completely blinded by their own greed and their absolute faith in DeAndre's financial supremacy. "You have 3 days," Zoe Brenda ordered, pointing toward the bedroom door. 3 days to get your cheap clothes out of this house. When I come back here on Friday, I expect this place to be spotless for Sasha and my new grandson. If you leave one piece of trash behind, I will personally throw it on the front lawn and set it on fire. Understood, I said quietly, offering a polite, almost vacant smile. I will be completely gone by Friday. You have my word. Brenda scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Good. Let us go, Keisha. The air in here is suffocating me. Keisha heaved the heavy black trash bag over her shoulder, grunting from the weight of my stolen property. She shot me one last victorious sneer before following her mother out of the closet. I stood perfectly still, listening to their heavy footsteps march down the stairs. The front door opened and slammed shut, shaking the walls of the house one final time. I walked over to the large window in my bedroom and looked down at the driveway. Keisha was struggling to shove the trash bag into the trunk of Brenda's aging sedan. They were laughing together, pointing up at the house, completely convinced they had just executed the perfect eviction. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened my secure email client. I drafted a quick message to my lead investigator. Add Keisha and Brenda to the asset tracking list. They just removed roughly $200,000 in luxury goods and jewelry from the primary residence. Let them keep it for now. We will add it to the final restitution invoice. I hit send. A cold, genuine smile finally broke across my face. They wanted a war over money and power. They wanted to strip me down and throw me out into the cold. But they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had walked directly into the blast zone, and they were too busy counting my stolen purses to hear the timer ticking down to 0. It was barely 2 hours later when the front door swung open for the second time that day. I was still in the living room, having just finished instructing my investigative team to monitor Keisha and Brenda's newly stolen assets. DeAndre walked in. He was not alone. Beside him was a man who looked entirely out of place in my $2.5 million home. The man was wearing a poorly fitted gray suit that bunched at the shoulders and a tie that had clearly seen better days. He clutched a scuffed leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. DeAndre, on the other hand, had changed into a fresh navy blue tailored suit. He walked with his chest puffed out, radiating the obnoxious confidence of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. I remained standing by the kitchen island, my arms resting casually on the cool marble. I did not say a word as they approached. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to initiate the confrontation. Zoe DeAndre barked, his voice loud and authoritative. "This is my attorney, Mr. Calvin Harrison. We are here to handle the logistics of your departure." I looked Mr. Harrison up and down. He avoided my gaze, nervously shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He did not look like a high-powered corporate divorce attorney. He looked like the kind of lawyer who advertised on highway billboards and worked out of a strip mall next to a laundromat. DeAndre had probably hired him because he was cheap and willing to bend the rules, assuming I would be too intimidated by the presence of any legal counsel to ask questions. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison," I said, keeping my tone perfectly polite and even. "Can I offer you a glass of water or perhaps a cup of coffee before we begin?" The lawyer blinked, clearly caught off guard by my hospitality. He opened his mouth to speak, but DeAndre cut him off. "We are not here to drink your coffee, Zoe," DeAndre snapped, slamming his hand flat on the marble counter. "We are here to finalize the reality of your situation. You see, I am not a stupid man. I work in commercial real estate. I deal with contracts and liabilities every single day. I knew from the very beginning that I had to protect my assets from a woman who contributed absolutely nothing to my empire." He gestured aggressively to Calvin. "Show her the document." Calvin fumbled with the clasps of his battered briefcase. His hands were actually shaking slightly as he pulled out a thick stack of papers stapled together inside a blue legal folder. He slid it across the marble island toward me. "Ms. Zoe." Calvin began clearing his throat and trying to adopt a stern professional tone. Per your husband's instructions, I am presenting you with a copy of your executed prenuptial agreement. This document outlines the distribution of assets in the event of a marital dissolution. I looked down at the folder but did not immediately touch it. A prenuptial agreement, I asked, tilting my head slightly. That is fascinating, DeAndre. Because I distinctly remember having a conversation about prenuptial agreements 7 years ago, and you explicitly told me that real men do not need contracts to control their households. You said it was an insult to your ability to provide. DeAndre smirked a nasty, condescending expression that made my stomach turn. You really are as naive as you look, Zoe. You think I would build a multi-million-dollar life and leave myself exposed? You signed this a week before the wedding. You were probably too busy picking out flower arrangements and cake flavors to actually read what I put in front of you. That is your problem, not mine. I slowly reached out and opened the blue folder. I flipped past the standard legal boilerplate pages and went straight to the terms of asset division. I read the clauses in silence, my trained legal mind instantly dissecting the absolute absurdity of what I was looking at. According to the document, in the event of a divorce, I was waiving my right to any and all alimony. I was forfeiting any claim to his retirement accounts, his investment portfolios, and his stock options. But the most glaringly obvious clause was highlighted on page 4. It stated that the primary residence, the Buckhead mansion we were currently standing in, was the sole and exclusive property of DeAndre, and that I had zero equity or ownership rights to the estate. It was a masterpiece of masculine delusion. DeAndre was trying to legally claim a house that he did not even own. The deed was registered to my private LLC. If this cheap lawyer had bothered to do a simple 5-minute public record search on the county property tax database, he would have realized that DeAndre's name was nowhere near the title. But DeAndre was so blinded by his own ego that he had probably just dictated these terms to Calvin and demanded he type them up. I flipped to the very last page where the signatures were located. There, next to the date, was my name. Zoe. I stared at the signature. It was not just a forgery. It was a remarkably bad forgery. The loops of the letters were shaky, lacking the fluid confidence of my actual handwriting. Someone had clearly taken an old document with my signature, placed it over this page, and traced it. And they had pressed so hard with the pen that I could actually feel the indentation on the back of the paper. "This is your master plan?" I asked quietly, looking up from the paper and meeting DeAndre's arrogant gaze. "It is not a plan, Zoe. It is the law," DeAndre declared, crossing his arms over his chest. "You signed it. Calvin here has legally verified it. That means you get nothing. The cars, the bank accounts, the furniture, the house, it all belongs to me. I built this life, and now I am taking it back so I can share it with a woman who actually respects me. Sasha is moving in on Friday. She is pregnant with my son, and she needs a stable environment." I looked at Calvin. "Mr. Harrison, are you aware of the federal penalties for knowingly presenting a forged legal document in an attempt to defraud a spouse of their assets?" Calvin swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. He tugged at his cheap collar. "Ms. Zoe, I assure you my client provided this document to me in good faith. If you wish to contest the validity of the signature, you will have to hire your own counsel and take us to court. But be warned, litigation is incredibly expensive. Given that your husband has terminated your access to all joint funds, you simply do not have the financial resources to fight this." That was their strategy. It was a classic intimidation tactic used by abusive spouses. Cut off the money, present a terrifying legal threat, and bank on the fact that the victim is too broke and exhausted to fight back. DeAndre was expecting me to crumble. He was expecting me to burst into tears, to beg him for a small settlement, to plead with him not to leave me destitute. Instead, I carefully closed the blue folder and pushed it back across the marble island. "You want the house, DeAndre?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "It is my house," he barked, his face twisting with irritation at my lack of a breakdown. "And I want you out of it. I gave you 3 days. You have until Friday morning to pack whatever cheap clothes my sister did not throw in the trash. I am changing the security codes at noon on Friday. If you are still on this property, I will have the police escort you off for trespassing." He leaned in closer, his eyes cold and cruel. You are a ghost, Zoe. You have no money. You have no career. You have no family to fall back on. You are nothing without me. You should be thanking me for letting you live in luxury for the last 7 years. Now be a good girl, take your little suitcase and disappear. I held his gaze for a long, silent moment. I was cataloging every single threat, every single insult, and every single crime he was currently committing. Wire fraud, embezzlement, marital asset hiding, and now blatant document forgery. He was wrapping the rope around his own neck and begging me to pull the lever. Okay, I said simply. DeAndre blinked. His tough guy persona faltered for a fraction of a second. What? I said okay, I repeated, stepping back from the island. If this is the legal document you want to stand by, I will not fight you on it today. I will be out of the house by Friday morning. You can have the mansion. You can have Sasha move in. You can have the security codes all to yourself. DeAndre stared at me, visibly confused by my complete surrender. He had come prepared for a screaming match. He had brought a lawyer to bully me into submission. He did not know what to do with immediate total compliance. Slowly, his confusion morphed back into a triumphant smirk. He genuinely believed he had broken me. That is what I thought, DeAndre sneered, grabbing the blue folder and shoving it back into Calvin's chest. You finally realize you are outmatched. Do not try to steal any of the appliances or the artwork on your way out. I have a detailed inventory of everything I own. He turned around and headed toward the front door, shouting over his shoulder. Come on, Calvin. We have real business to attend to. I have a VP promotion to secure, and I cannot waste any more time dealing with a loser. Calvin scurried after him, clutching his battered briefcase tightly. He did not even look back at me. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut, leaving me standing alone in the massive, quiet kitchen. I looked down at the marble island where the fake prenuptial agreement had just rested. A soft chuckle escaped my lips, echoing in the empty space. DeAndre was so arrogant, so blinded by his need to be the alpha male, that he had handed me the absolute perfect weapon to destroy him. He wanted me out by Friday. He wanted to move his pregnant mistress into my house. He wanted to parade his fake wealth in front of his toxic family. I was going to let him do exactly that. I was going to let him climb to the very highest peak of his ego. Because the higher he climbed, the more devastating the fall was going to be. I turned away from the kitchen and walked slowly up the stairs to my bedroom. It was time to pack my cheap clothes. The storm was coming, and I needed to be in my penthouse when the lightning finally struck. I walked into the master suite and pulled a basic black canvas suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. Keisha had already decimated the lower shelves, taking every designer label she could get her greedy hands on. I did not care. I opened the suitcase on the bed and began folding plain cotton t-shirts, basic yoga pants, and simple sweaters. I packed a generic toiletry bag. No expensive imported perfumes, no diamond watches, no customized gold jewelry. I was leaving the house exactly as DeAndre expected me to leave it. He wanted me to look broken, defeated, and completely empty-handed. He needed his narrative to be perfectly preserved. Why did I not fight back? If you are listening to this, you are probably screaming at your screen right now. You are wondering why I did not tear up that forged legal document and scream about my absolute ownership of the estate. You are wondering why I did not pull up my multi-million-dollar bank statements and shove them right in his smug face. A lesser woman would have fought. She would have called her lawyer right there in the kitchen. She would have screamed at Calvin Harrison and threatened to expose the forged signature to the local police department. But I was not a lesser woman. I was a predator who had spent years operating in the ruthless shadows of the corporate private equity world. If I had exposed my hand in that kitchen, DeAndre would have panicked. He would have immediately called his bank, realized the accounts were frozen, and started destroying digital evidence of his embezzlement. He might have even fled the state. I needed him to feel completely safe. I needed him to believe his fake prenuptial agreement was an ironclad shield. I needed him to sit on his throne of lies so comfortably that he would not even notice the guillotine blade suspended right above his neck. In the world of high-stakes finance, you never interrupt your opponent when they are making a fatal mistake. I pulled out my phone and opened the ride-sharing app. I did not order an executive black car or a luxury sport utility vehicle. I selected the cheapest, most basic option available on the platform, a standard economy ride. The app showed a silver Honda Civic was 3 minutes away. Perfect. I zipped the canvas suitcase shut. It was incredibly light, carrying barely enough clothes for a weekend trip. I grabbed my phone charger, my laptop, and a plain black trench coat. I did not take a final look around the bedroom. I did not feel a single drop of nostalgia or sadness for the life I was leaving behind. The expensive imported rugs and the custom silk curtains were nothing but props in a stage play that had just reached its final act. I rolled the suitcase out of the bedroom and down the long hallway. The small plastic wheels made a soft clicking sound against the polished hardwood floors. As I descended the grand sweeping staircase, I could hear loud booming laughter coming from outside the open front door. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, smoothing out the front of my blouse, and took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to give my husband and his family exactly the show they desperately wanted. I stepped out onto the wide stone porch. The warm Atlanta afternoon breeze hit my face. DeAndre was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, his hands resting confidently on his hips. Brenda and Keisha had apparently never left the neighborhood. They were leaning against Brenda's aging four-door sedan, which was still parked illegally at the edge of the driveway. The trunk was heavily weighed down by my stolen designer bags. Keisha was actually wearing my vintage Chanel sunglasses. She did not even have the common decency to wait until I was off the property to flaunt my stolen property. "Look who it is," DeAndre announced loudly, throwing his arms open in a mock gesture of grand welcome. "The Queen is finally abdicating her throne. I was wondering how long it would take you to pack up your miserable little life." Brenda let out a sharp, cackling laugh that grated on my nerves. She clapped her hands together like she was watching a comedy show. "Oh, look at that tiny little bag. Is that absolutely all you are taking with you, Zoe? Are you sure you do not want to raid my son's pantry for some canned goods before you go? You are going to need them when you are living in a cardboard box under the downtown highway bridge." Keisha adjusted the stolen sunglasses on her face and smirked brightly. "I told you she was a total loser, Mom. Look at her. 7 years of marriage to a successful man, and she is leaving with a duffel bag from a discount department store. It is actually pathetic to watch." DeAndre walked up the first few steps of the porch, deliberately blocking my path to the driveway. He looked down at my cheap suitcase, his eyes gleaming with absolute, unfiltered triumph. "I told you I would break you, Zoe," he sneered, lowering his voice so only I could hear the pure malice in his tone. "I told you that you were nothing without my money and my status. You thought you could send an anonymous tip to my corporate office and ruin me. You thought you could play games with a man who holds all the winning cards? Look at you right now. You have no home, no money, no husband, and absolutely no future. You are walking away with nothing but the cheap clothes on your back. You are a ghost." Right on cue, the silver Honda Civic turned onto our quiet, affluent street. It chugged slowly up the long, perfectly paved driveway. The engine rattled slightly, making the car stand out like a sore thumb against the backdrop of our $2.5 million estate and DeAndre's pristine luxury SUV. The driver, an older gentleman wearing a faded baseball cap, put the car in park and popped the trunk. He looked incredibly confused and visibly intimidated by the massive house and the three people laughing loudly in the driveway. I did not answer DeAndre. I did not defend myself. I simply smiled. It was not a sad smile or a forced smile trying to hide tears. It was a genuine, deeply relaxed smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I stepped neatly around him, gripping the flimsy handle of my cheap suitcase. I walked down the stone steps, my posture perfectly straight, my head held high. I did not look at Brenda. I did not look at Keisha. I walked straight to the back of the Honda Civic and lifted my bag into the trunk. The driver quickly got out, looking nervously at DeAndre's imposing figure. "Let me help you with that, miss," he offered cautiously. "I got it, thank you," I told the driver quietly, closing the trunk myself with a solid thud. DeAndre followed me down the driveway, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the pavement. My absolute silence was clearly irritating him. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to beg him for a second chance or plead for a small financial settlement. My calm, unbothered demeanor was infuriating his massive ego. "What are you smiling at, you psycho?" He snapped, his voice losing some of its triumphant edge and bordering on pure frustration. "You think this is funny? You think losing your entire life is a joke?" I turned to face him before opening the passenger side car door. I let my eyes slowly travel over his tailored Italian suit, his arrogant, flushed face, and the massive brick mansion towering behind him. I thought about the forged legal document currently sitting on my kitchen counter. I thought about the federal corporate auditors currently ripping through his corporate expense reports line by merciless line. I thought about the simple fact that he was proudly kicking me out of a property that my holding company legally owned. "I am smiling because I am genuinely happy for you, DeAndre," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any anger. "You finally got exactly what you wanted. You have your freedom. You have your beautiful house. You have your new pregnant girlfriend. You have won the game." Brenda cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted from the sedan, "You hear that, DeAndre? She is finally admitting total defeat. Get in that cheap little car and do not ever come back here, Zoe. We are changing the security locks tonight." "I will not be coming back," I promised Brenda, my voice carrying clearly over the warm air of the driveway. "Enjoy the weekend, all of you." I slid into the back seat of the Honda Civic and closed the door firmly. The interior smelled like stale air freshener and old coffee, a stark contrast to the custom leather interior of the vehicles I usually drove. The driver put the car in drive and began to slowly back out of the long, winding driveway. Through the dark-tinted window, I watched them celebrate my departure. DeAndre had his hands firmly on his hips, his chest puffed out like a proud, victorious general. Keisha and Brenda were literally high-fiving each other over the roof of their car. They were throwing a celebration on my front lawn. To any outsider watching, it looked like the ultimate domestic tragedy. A wealthy, powerful husband throwing out his useless, dependent wife to make room for his young, fertile mistress. It looked like the bad guys had won the war without shedding a single drop of blood. But as the car merged onto the highway, leaving the affluent suburbs of Buckhead completely behind, I felt nothing but cold anticipation. By walking away in total silence, I had just given DeAndre the ultimate gift. I gave him enough rope to hang himself. I left him alone in that massive house surrounded by his toxic enablers, completely unchecked and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. Over the next few days, his ego was going to inflate to catastrophic, blinding proportions. He was going to spend money he did not actually have. He was going to throw a massive, expensive party to celebrate a corporate promotion he was never going to get. He was going to put his name on illegal documents because he thought nobody was watching. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened it on my lap. The bright screen illuminated the dark back seat. I logged into my highly secure server and pulled up the live feed of the hidden security cameras installed throughout the Buckhead mansion. DeAndre did not know about these cameras. I had them installed for security purposes years ago, but they were registered exclusively to my private network. On the screen, I watched DeAndre walk confidently back into the house, laughing loudly on his cell phone, undoubtedly calling Sasha to tell her the coast was clear to move in. I watched Keisha walk through the front door right behind him, carrying my stolen bags like trophies. They were making themselves right at home in a giant, beautiful $2.5 million mousetrap. The storm was brewing, and the sky was turning pitch black. I leaned back against the cheap fabric seat of the Uber and typed a final encrypted message to my Wall Street legal team. "The target is completely unaware. Proceed with the corporate audit. Let him plan his baby shower. We will bring the fireworks." The very next morning, I sat at the expansive glass desk in my downtown penthouse. The penthouse was a triplex with panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline, a property I bought in cash 3 years ago under a blind trust. I had my primary work monitor displaying the intricate web of DeAndre's corporate accounts, while my tablet was propped up on a silver stand tuned directly to Sasha's public Instagram page. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 10:15, a notification popped up on the screen. Sasha is going live. Sasha's face filled the screen, heavily filtered and beaming with pure arrogance. She was wearing a tight pink velvet tracksuit that left little to the imagination, holding her phone high to capture her best angle. "Good morning, my beautiful followers," Sasha cooed into the camera, tossing her long extensions over her shoulder. "I told you all that big things were coming, and your girl finally secured the bag. Welcome to my new castle." She spun the camera around to reveal the grand foyer of my Buckhead mansion. The sunlight caught the antique crystal chandelier I had imported from Italy. DeAndre walked into the frame wearing a smug grin and holding a cup of coffee. He wrapped his free arm around Sasha's waist and kissed her cheek for the thousands of strangers watching. "Say hi to the man of the house, everybody." Sasha giggled. The man who actually knows how to treat a real woman. DeAndre puffed out his chest and offered a confident nod to the camera before walking toward the kitchen. Sasha turned the lens back to herself, her expression turning deliciously petty. "I just had to get up and show you all my new reality," she bragged, walking through the formal dining room and into the massive, open-concept kitchen. "This house is gorgeous, but honestly, the energy in here was so dry and boring before I arrived. The woman who lived here before me had absolutely no taste, just cold, lifeless energy. But that is what happens when you do not know how to keep your man happy. You get replaced, and you get sent packing in a cheap little Uber while the real upgrade moves in." I watched her trail her long acrylic nails over the custom white marble island. That piece of stone alone cost $25,000 paid directly from my private holding company. Sasha had no idea she was caressing evidence of her boyfriend's impending financial ruin. "Look at this kitchen, you guys!" she squealed, pointing the camera at the professional-grade stainless steel appliances. DeAndre said, "I do not even have to cook if I do not want to. We are hiring a private chef for my pregnancy cravings. Because when you are carrying a king's son, you get treated like royalty, not like some broke ex-wife who had to beg for an allowance." As she spoke, my secure email chimed. It was my lead forensic accountant, David. I opened the message on my main monitor. "Zoe, we found a massive discrepancy in the third quarter commercial vendor accounts. DeAndre authorized a wire transfer of $120,000 yesterday afternoon, disguised as a payment to a structural engineering firm. The routing number actually belongs to a luxury auto dealership in Sandy Springs." I read the email twice, a cold smile spreading across my face. $120,000, embezzled directly from the corporate funds of the company I was currently acquiring. Right on cue, Sasha's voice pitched up to a deafening squeal on the tablet. "Oh my gosh, you guys, I almost forgot the best part. Come outside with me right now. You are not going to believe what my baby just surprised me with." Sasha practically sprinted through the living room and threw open the heavy mahogany front door. She ran out onto the stone porch and pointed her phone camera down at the driveway. Sitting perfectly parked in the center of the pavement was a brand new, pristine white Range Rover autobiography. A giant red velvet bow was stuck to the hood, gleaming in the morning sun. "Look at my new baby," Sasha screamed, jumping up and down, making sure the camera captured every angle of the luxury sport utility vehicle. A push present for the best mom-to-be. "My man literally went out yesterday and bought this for me in cash, because he said his queen deserves the safest car on the road." I typed a quick reply to David on my secure server. "Match the $120,000 wire transfer to a white Range Rover autobiography purchased yesterday in Sandy Springs. Log it as Exhibit B for federal wire fraud." Sasha marched down the porch steps and walked around the vehicle, running her hands over the sleek paint job. "This is what happens when you level up, ladies," she preached to her viewers, her tone dripping with condescension. "Do not ever settle for a man who makes you split the bills. And definitely do not be like the pathetic ex-wife who let this man slip through her fingers. I heard she literally packed her cheap little clothes in a canvas bag and took a Honda Civic to a homeless shelter. Meanwhile, I am driving $100,000 fully loaded." She opened the driver's side door and climbed into the plush leather seat, showing off the digital dashboard and the panoramic sunroof. Every single word out of her mouth was a confession. Every brag was a documented piece of evidence. She was doing the federal investigators' work for them, broadcasting DeAndre's financial crimes in stunning high definition to an audience of 5,000 people. After thoroughly showing off the stolen vehicle, Sasha took her live stream upstairs. I watched through the screen as she paraded down the second-floor hallway and pushed open the double doors to the master suite. My master suite. "And this is where the magic happens," she purred, throwing herself onto the custom king-sized bed. She rolled around on the imported Egyptian cotton sheets, completely oblivious to the fact that I had chosen every single thread in that room. "I am definitely going to have to redecorate, though," she complained, looking around the room with a critical sneer. "It is way too minimalist in here." DeAndre gave me his platinum credit card and told me I have an unlimited budget to make this house my own. I am thinking pink silk curtains, a massive vanity right there by the window, and we are completely tearing out the closet to make room for my bags. She paused, reading the comments scrolling rapidly up her screen. A cruel laugh escaped her lips. "Yes, girl," she answered a follower's question. "His mom and his sister are coming over later today to help me plan the baby shower. And let me tell you, it is going to be the event of the year. We are sparing absolutely no expense. Ice sculptures, a caviar bar, a live band. DeAndre is getting a massive promotion to vice president next week, so we are celebrating everything all at once. God is so good to us." As the live stream neared its end, I noticed a familiar username pop up in the scrolling chat. It was Keisha. My sister-in-law was actively hyping up the mistress in the comments section. "That is right, sis. Show them how a real boss lady lives," Keisha typed. "Cannot wait for the shower. We are going to shut the whole city down." Sasha saw the comment and shrieked with delight. "Hey, Keisha. Yes, we are going to be popping bottles all night. Love you, sister." It was a beautiful display of toxic solidarity. They were all feeding off each other's delusions, bound together by their shared greed and their mutual hatred for a woman they fundamentally misunderstood. They believed they had won the ultimate prize, but they had not won a prize. They had simply boarded a sinking ship and locked themselves in the gold-plated captain's quarters. I reached out and tapped the screen record button on my tablet, saving the entire 40-minute live stream directly to my encrypted cloud drive. She had just admitted on a public platform that DeAndre was using an unlimited budget for home renovations and a lavish party money that I knew for an absolute fact he did not have legally. He was pulling funds from his active real estate development projects to finance a fake billionaire lifestyle. He was desperate to prove to Sasha, his mother, and his sister that he was the ultimate provider, and he was doing it right in the middle of a corporate acquisition audit. It was financial suicide on a level I had never witnessed before. My phone buzzed on the glass desk. It was a text from the head of the private equity board, my right-hand man in New York. "The acquisition paperwork is finalized. We officially take controlling interest of DeAndre's parent company next Thursday. How do you want to handle the transition?" I looked at the tablet screen. Sasha was now blowing kisses to the camera, telling her followers she had to go meet the interior designers to rip up my floors. I picked up my phone and typed my response. "Do not announce the takeover to the regional directors yet. I want the transition to be a surprise. DeAndre is throwing a massive baby shower at his residence next weekend. Let us schedule the corporate restructuring announcement for exactly the same day. I will deliver the news personally." I set the phone down and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. The view of Atlanta stretched out endlessly before me. DeAndre thought he had completely erased me from his life. He thought he had discarded a boring, dependent woman and upgraded to a glamorous, subservient trophy. He thought he was untouchable. He had exactly 1 week left of playing king of the castle. 1 week of Sasha flaunting stolen money on the internet. 1 week of his mother, Brenda, bragging to her church friends about her wealthy son. 1 week until the absolute darkest storm of their lives came crashing through their front door, led by the exact woman they had all thrown away. I closed the Instagram application and turned my full attention back to the forensic audit displayed on my main monitor. Line by line, I tracked DeAndre's fraudulent transactions. The catering deposit for the baby shower, the interior design consultation fee, the florist, all paid for with stolen corporate money. I documented every single dime. Let them celebrate. Let them drink the champagne and pose for the cameras. I was going to let them reach the absolute peak of their arrogance, and then I was going to take everything away. I did not have to wait long to see exactly how high that peak of arrogance would reach. By Tuesday morning, the digital trap I had set was catching more rats than I had ever anticipated. My forensic accounting team forwarded a high-priority alert to my secure server. It was a massive credit inquiry on DeAndre's financial profile. I opened the file and leaned closer to the monitor, a cold laugh escaping my lips as I read the details. Keisha had never held a job for more than 6 consecutive months in her entire adult life. Her entire existence was funded by the financial crumbs DeAndre threw her way to keep her loyal. But now, with me out of the picture and Sasha treating her like a VIP sister, Keisha felt absolutely invincible. She had marched into a high-end real estate office in Midtown Atlanta carrying one of my stolen vintage Chanel bags and demanded to see their luxury penthouses. I watched the credit check hit the financial system in real time. She was applying for a $1.2 million condo overlooking Piedmont Park. The monthly homeowner association fees alone were more than she made in an entire year of working retail. Of course, a woman with a credit score in the low 500s and zero verifiable income was never getting approved for $1 million mortgage on her own. That is where DeAndre stepped in to play the hero. My screen lit up with a secure document intercepted from the mortgage lender. DeAndre had electronically signed as the primary guarantor. He co-signed a 30-year mortgage for a luxury condo he would never live in, just to prove to his little sister that he was the ultimate provider. He submitted his corporate income statements to the bank to secure the loan, completely unaware that those exact same statements were currently being analyzed by my federal investigators for massive fraud. By co-signing that loan, DeAndre legally bound Keisha to his impending financial collapse. When he went down, the bank would immediately foreclose on her shiny new condo, leaving her with a massive mountain of debt and a ruined credit profile that she could never recover from. I could have stopped the transaction. I could have anonymously flagged the application for income verification and killed the deal. Instead, I approved the bank's inquiry from the back end of the system, ensuring the loan went through perfectly. Let her have the keys. Let her buy the expensive modern furniture on credit. The higher she climbed up her fake social ladder, the harder she was going to hit the pavement. While Keisha was busy playing a high-rolling real estate mogul, Brenda was aggressively cementing her status as the matriarch of the year. Brenda had spent her entire adult life trying to climb the vicious social ladder of her elite megachurch. The women in her congregation were ruthless, constantly judging each other by the cars their children drove, the designer suits they wore to Sunday service, and the zip codes they lived in. Brenda had always used my Buckhead mansion to host her weekly Bible studies, parading my beautifully decorated home as her own personal achievement. But a baby shower for her first grandson, that required a level of pure extravagance that bordered on absolute insanity. Through the digital invoices rolling into DeAndre's tracked accounts, I watched Brenda's master plan unfold line by ridiculous line. She was not just throwing a baby shower. She was staging a royal coronation. She hired Atlanta's most expensive celebrity event planner. The invoices flashing across my screen were staggering: $15,000 for custom floral walls imported from Ecuador, $10,000 for a caviar and imported seafood tower, $5,000 for a custom sculpted ice centerpiece shaped like a life-sized baby carriage. She even booked a 10-piece live jazz band to play in the backyard of the mansion. Brenda invited over 200 guests, including every prominent family in her church congregation and all of DeAndre's country club friends. She wanted a massive audience to witness her son's absolute triumph. She wanted to show off Sasha, the young subservient daughter-in-law, who would finally give her the heir she had always demanded. The sheer volume of money flowing out of DeAndre's accounts to fund this circus was breathtaking. But there was a massive, glaring problem. The money was not coming from DeAndre's personal savings. He did not have any personal savings. His entire wealthy lifestyle had been quietly subsidized by my silent contributions for 7 years. I paid for the luxury vacations, I paid for the custom furniture, I paid the exorbitant property taxes. With my private equity funds completely cut off and his access to my accounts terminated, DeAndre was suddenly forced to fund a billionaire lifestyle on a mere corporate director's salary. It was mathematically impossible, so he was forced to find a new well to draw from, and his arrogant ego chose the absolute worst possible source. As the silent majority partner of the massive private equity firm actively acquiring his company, I had complete, unrestricted access to the internal accounting ledgers of his commercial real estate division. DeAndre was currently managing a $70 million commercial development project in the downtown business district. The project had a massive contingency fund held in a corporate escrow account designed to cover emergency construction delays. Because DeAndre was a senior director, he had executive clearance to access those funds. Through my forensic software, I watched him systematically execute the most sloppy, desperate embezzlement scheme I had ever seen. DeAndre was using his corporate clearance to draft fake invoices from fictitious shell companies. I watched a digital transaction log show him authorizing a payment of $80,000 to a fake structural engineering contractor. He wired the company money to an untraceable secondary account and then funneled those stolen funds directly into his personal checking account. He was literally stealing investor money to pay for Sasha's white Range Rover, Keisha's $1 million midtown condo, and Brenda's ridiculous ice sculptures. It was a textbook case of federal wire fraud and severe corporate embezzlement. Every time Sasha swiped that platinum credit card for a designer baby outfit, she was adding another count to his federal indictment. Every time Brenda cheerfully approved a new expensive catering menu for the party, she was ensuring her golden child son would spend the next decade in a maximum security federal prison. DeAndre felt completely invincible because he genuinely believed nobody was looking. He thought the upcoming corporate merger was going to create so much administrative chaos that his financial crimes would be buried forever in a sea of transition paperwork. He thought the new anonymous ownership group would be too busy restructuring the executive board to notice a few $100,000 missing from a massive development fund. He had absolutely no idea that the new owner was sitting alone in a penthouse just 3 miles away, drinking green tea and highlighting every single fraudulent wire transfer with a digital red marker. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair and watched the stolen numbers climb higher and higher. 200,000, 350,000, $500,000 embezzled in less than 10 days. He was burning through stolen cash with the frantic, desperate frenzy of a man trying to outrun his own massive lie. He could not tell his mother that he could not afford the baby shower. He could not tell his mistress that he could not afford the car. His entire identity was wrapped up in being the rich, powerful provider. To admit he was broke without his wife would destroy the fragile illusion he had spent his entire life building. So he kept stealing. The baby shower was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. It was going to be the social event of the season in Buckhead. Brenda had been hyping it up on every social media platform for days, promising her wealthy friends a day of unmatched luxury and celebration. DeAndre had even ordered a custom-tailored Italian suit for the occasion, paid for, of course, with stolen corporate funds disguised as a plumbing consultation fee. They were all completely intoxicated by their own greed. They were high on the thrill of having kicked me out into the cold, completely convinced that they had successfully conquered my kingdom and claimed all my treasure. They had built a massive glittering tower of cards, stacked impossibly high into the sky, and they were throwing a massive expensive party right on the very top floor. My secure phone buzzed on the glass desk. It was my lead corporate attorney in New York. "The federal authorities have reviewed the audit files you sent over, Zoe." His voice crackled through the speaker, strictly professional and devoid of emotion. "The FBI Economic Crimes Division has officially issued the arrest warrants for wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. We are ready to move on your command." I looked at the digital calendar on my monitor. Today was Thursday. The extravagant baby shower was in exactly 48 hours. I smiled, a dark, satisfying feeling settling deep in my chest. "Hold the warrants until Saturday afternoon," I instructed the attorney, my voice cold and precise. I want the agents to arrive at the Buckhead residence at exactly 2 o'clock. Let the guests arrive first. Let the champagne start flowing. I want every single person in their social circle to be present when the house of cards comes crashing down. Understood, the attorney replied. We will see you on Saturday, Madam Chairman. I ended the call and closed the audit files. Everything was perfectly in place. DeAndre, Brenda, Keisha, and Sasha were about to host the most unforgettable party in Atlanta's history, and I was going to be the absolute best guest they never invited. Friday morning arrived with the heavy, suffocating humidity typical of Atlanta. Inside the sleek, glass-enclosed high-rise of DeAndre's corporate headquarters, the atmosphere was completely different. It was electric with panic. The entire commercial real estate division was running on caffeine and pure fear. The massive acquisition by an anonymous private equity firm had been the only topic of conversation for the past 2 months. Rumors were flying around the cubicles about mass layoffs, departmental restructuring, and aggressive new management. Most of the senior directors were sweating through their expensive shirts, terrified that their comfortable six-figure jobs were about to be eliminated by a ruthless Wall Street hatchet man. DeAndre, however, was not sweating. He was practically floating. He strolled out of the executive elevator at 10:15 in the morning, an hour and a half late, holding a cup of artisan coffee. He was wearing the custom-tailored charcoal gray Italian suit he had illegally purchased with company money just 2 days prior. The fabric draped perfectly over his broad shoulders, projecting the exact image of corporate royalty he desperately wanted to embody. He walked through the bustling bullpen of junior analysts and project managers with a slow, deliberate swagger. He wanted everyone to see how unbothered he was by the corporate takeover. He pushed open the heavy glass door to his corner office and tossed his leather briefcase onto his massive oak desk. His office had a perfect view of the downtown skyline, a view he believed he was destined to rule. Almost immediately, a fellow senior director named Julian knocked on the open doorframe. Julian looked exhausted, holding a thick binder of financial transition documents. "You are late," Julian noted, stepping into the office and dropping the heavy binder onto the edge of DeAndre's desk. "The transition auditors have been requesting our departmental expense summaries since 8 o'clock this morning. They are going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. People are terrified, DeAndre. We do not even know the name of the holding company buying us out, and they are already freezing our operational budgets." DeAndre took a slow sip of his coffee and smiled, leaning back in his plush leather chair. He kicked his expensive Italian leather shoes up onto the edge of the mahogany desk, crossing his ankles. "Relax, Julian," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The only people who need to be terrified are the dead weight. The junior guys who do not bring in real capital. If you are actually producing this buyout, is the greatest thing that could possibly happen to you. You just have to know how to position yourself." Julian frowned, clearly irritated by DeAndre's massive ego. "Position yourself. We are getting swallowed by a ghost equity firm. Nobody is safe." The current vice president was literally escorted out of the building by security yesterday afternoon. "They are clearing house at the top." DeAndre chuckled, a deep, arrogant sound that echoed in the spacious office. Exactly. They cleared out the old vice president because he was a dinosaur. He did not have the vision to take this division into the next decade. The new owners know exactly what they are doing. They are clearing the path for fresh, aggressive leadership. Leadership that knows how to handle massive, multi-million-dollar urban developments. DeAndre leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, locking eyes with Julian. "Let me tell you a little secret, Julian. I have been fielding calls from the transition liaisons all week. They have been looking very closely at my portfolio. They see the numbers I am bringing in. When the dust settles on Monday morning and the new ownership group takes their seats in the boardroom, I am not going to be sitting here in this corner office anymore. I am taking the vice president's suite on the top floor." Julian stared at him, caught somewhere between disbelief and disgust. "You think the anonymous firm is going to promote you to vice president during a hostile takeover? I do not think it." "I know it," DeAndre lied smoothly. His ego was so massive he had actually started to believe his own fabricated reality. "My track record speaks for itself. I am the face of this division." Now take that binder of yours and stop panicking. Winners do not panic during a transition. They conquer. Julian shook his head, grabbed his binder, and walked out of the office without another word. DeAndre smirked at Julian's retreating back. He genuinely believed his colleagues were just jealous of his impending success. He felt absolutely untouchable. Once he was alone, DeAndre dropped his feet from the desk and turned his attention to his dual computer monitors. He needed to handle one final piece of business before he could completely check out for the weekend. He opened his secure corporate portal and navigated to the escrow accounts for his downtown commercial project, the contingency fund. Sitting in my penthouse across the city, I watched his screen in real time through my encrypted surveillance software. I watched the mouse cursor move across the digital ledger. DeAndre was preparing his final, most arrogant theft yet. Because the baby shower was tomorrow, and because Sasha had gone completely overboard with her unlimited budget demands, he needed one last massive injection of cash to cover the final vendor payments and ensure his bank account looked impressive for the weekend. He pulled up a blank invoice template and quickly typed in the name of a fake environmental consulting firm he had registered under a shell corporation 2 weeks ago. He billed the company for $55,000, citing emergency soil testing for the downtown project site. He did not hesitate. He did not double-check his math or look over his shoulder. He simply attached his digital executive signature to the fraudulent document and hit submit. In his mind, his logic was flawless. He believed the corporate merger was creating a massive administrative blackout. He knew the legacy accounting department was completely overwhelmed with packaging years of financial data for the new owners. He figured that a random $55,000 invoice buried inside a $70 million development folder would go completely unnoticed. By the time anyone even thought to look at the project's contingency fund, he would already be the vice president of the division. And as vice president, he would have the ultimate authority to simply write off the missing funds as unforeseen development losses. It was the perfect crime executed by a man who thought he was the smartest person in the entire building. I sat at my glass desk watching the $55,000 wire transfer hit the banking network. With a few swift keystrokes, I intercepted the digital approval file on the back end of the corporate server. I did not block the transfer. Instead, I permanently locked the file with an encrypted security tag. DeAndre could never go back and delete the invoice. He could never alter the timestamp or change the routing numbers. The digital evidence was now permanently cemented into the federal audit log, completely out of his reach. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, DeAndre decided he had worked hard enough for the day. He sent a mass email to his entire project team. I read the text as it populated on my screen. Team, I am heading out early to handle some personal executive business. Excellent work this week holding the line during the transition. Rest up this weekend. Monday brings a new era for all of us and expect some major positive changes in departmental leadership. Cheers, DeAndre. It was a victory lap for a race he had already spectacularly lost. He packed up his leather briefcase, grabbed his suit jacket, and walked out of his office. As he headed toward the elevators, his desk phone began to ring. It was a direct line from a junior accounting clerk on the 4th floor. I listened to the intercepted voicemail the clerk left a minute later. Mr. DeAndre, this is Kevin down in accounting. I was just reviewing the transition batch files and the routing number for the environmental consulting invoice you just approved flagged as a residential bank account rather than a commercial one. I need you to sign an override form before I can authorize the clearinghouse. Please call me back before 5. It was a minor red flag. A smart man, a cautious man, would have immediately recognized the danger called the clerk and canceled the transaction to save his own skin. But DeAndre was not cautious. He received the voicemail notification on his cell phone while he was riding the elevator down to the lobby. I watched the cellular data log show that he listened to exactly 4 seconds of the message before hitting delete. He could not be bothered. He was the soon-to-be vice president. A junior clerk in accounting was completely beneath his notice. He strutted out of the corporate lobby and handed his valet ticket to the attendant. He climbed into his luxury SUV, completely ignoring the warning signs flashing brightly right in front of his face. He was heading back to the Buckhead mansion to supervise the delivery of the imported ice sculptures in the Caviar Tower. His mind was entirely focused on the lavish party he was throwing the next day. He was imagining the look of sheer awe and envy on the faces of his mother's church friends when they saw the custom decorations. He was picturing Sasha draped in stolen designer jewelry showing off her baby bump to the Atlanta elite. He felt like a king returning to his castle. He thought he had successfully banished me from his kingdom, secured a massive promotion, and funded his dream life without a single consequence. The illusion was absolutely perfect. It was a flawless, glittering bubble of pure corporate hubris and toxic masculinity. I powered down my secondary monitors and closed my laptop. The trap was fully loaded, the bait had been swallowed whole, and the federal warrants were officially signed and resting in a manila folder on my desk. Friday was over. The corporate illusion had served its purpose. Tomorrow was Saturday. Tomorrow the bubble would finally burst, and the reality I had meticulously orchestrated would come crashing down on his head with the force of a freight train. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, clear blue sky over Atlanta. I stepped out of my private elevator, the polished steel doors sliding open silently to reveal the grand foyer of my actual residence. The $8 million triplex penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed 360-degree view of the city. While DeAndre was busy parading around a $2.5 million suburban mansion that he did not even own, I was living at the absolute apex of the city skyline. I had just returned from a brutal 5-mile morning run, my mind completely clear and my focus razor-sharp. Today was the day of the execution. I walked past the floating glass staircase and entered my private home office, a room that looked more like a Wall Street command center than a residential study. I bypassed the standard monitors I had been using all week and approached the massive wall-mounted digital smartboard at the far end of the room. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The glass instantly turned opaque and the screen flared to life, establishing a secure, heavily encrypted video link directly to a boardroom in Manhattan. 4 men and 2 women appeared on the screen, all dressed in immaculate business attire, despite it being a Saturday morning. They were the senior partners and executive board members of my private equity firm. Sitting at the head of the digital table was my lead corporate attorney, accompanied by a stern-looking man wearing a dark suit and a federal badge clipped to his belt. He was Special Agent Reynolds from the FBI Economic Crimes Division. "Good morning, Madam Chairman," my lead attorney said, his voice echoing cleanly through the surround sound speakers. "We have everyone assembled as requested. The final transition documents for the corporate buyout are fully executed. As of midnight last night, our firm officially holds 85% controlling interest in the commercial real estate parent company. You are now the absolute sovereign authority over that entire corporate structure." "Good morning, everyone," I replied, wiping a bead of sweat from my collarbone with a pure white towel. I took a seat in my ergonomic leather chair, leaning forward to look at the grid of faces on the screen. Let us skip the pleasantries. I want a final status report on the target before we initiate the freeze. David, what are the final numbers on the internal audit? David, my lead forensic accountant, adjusted his glasses and looked down at his tablet. It is a complete financial massacre, Zoe. Over the past 14 days, DeAndre has authorized 32 fraudulent wire transfers. He used fake vendor invoices, dummy shell corporations, and unauthorized executive overrides to siphon funds directly from the downtown commercial development escrow accounts. The grand total of embezzled corporate capital stands at exactly $685,000. A low murmur of disbelief rippled through the Wall Street boardroom. Even for seasoned private equity sharks, the sheer brazenness of the theft was staggering. "And the $55,000 invoice from yesterday afternoon?" I asked, pulling up the intercepted file on my personal tablet. "Cleared and tracked," David confirmed. He wired it to a fake environmental consulting firm, and then immediately transferred the funds to a personal checking account. We have the digital receipts for every single penny. He used the stolen money to pay for high-end caterers, imported florists, and a celebrity event planner. He literally used federal wire fraud to buy caviar and ice sculptures for a baby shower. Special Agent Reynolds leaned closer to his microphone, his expression completely devoid of amusement. "We have reviewed the entire audit log, Miss Zoe. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming. We have officially secured the arrest warrants for DeAndre on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and aggravated identity theft. We also have a secondary warrant for document forgery regarding the fake prenuptial agreement he presented to you." "Excellent," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "What about the collateral damage? What about Keisha and Brenda?" David tapped his screen again. "Keisha successfully closed on the $1.2 million Midtown luxury condo yesterday evening. DeAndre signed as the sole financial guarantor using his heavily inflated and now completely fraudulent corporate income statements. Because the loan was secured using falsified documents and stolen wealth, the bank will trigger an immediate default clause. The second DeAndre is placed in federal custody. Keisha will be evicted, the property will be seized, and she will be hit with massive financial penalties for mortgage fraud. As for Brenda, she co-signed the lease on Sasha's new Range Rover. When the assets are frozen, that vehicle will be repossessed by Tuesday." "They wanted to play high society," I mused quietly, staring at the Atlanta skyline through the glass walls. "Now they get to pay the high society bill." I stood up from the desk and walked closer to the smartboard projecting absolute authority. My partners on Wall Street watched me with a mixture of deep respect and slight terror. They had known me for years as a brilliant, ruthless financial strategist, but none of them had ever seen me deploy a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition simply to destroy an unfaithful husband and his toxic family. I had bought an entire commercial real estate empire just to fire one man. It was a flex of absolute terrifying power. "Listen to me very carefully," I instructed the boardroom. "At exactly 12 o'clock noon today, Eastern Standard Time, I want the absolute freeze executed. David, you will lock DeAndre out of every single corporate server, deactivate his keycards, wipe his executive clearance, and completely freeze all of his personal and professional banking accounts. I want his credit cards declining before the first guest even asks for a glass of champagne." "Understood." Madam Chairman David nodded sharply. "Agent Reynolds." I continued turning my gaze to the federal agent. "The party is scheduled to begin at 1 o'clock at the Buckhead residence. I will arrive precisely at 2 o'clock to personally deliver his termination papers and the new corporate restructuring details. I want your strike team waiting at the perimeter. You do not move in until I give the explicit signal. I want him at the absolute height of his arrogance when the handcuffs go on. We have 2 unmarked tactical vehicles ready to deploy." Reynolds confirmed his professional demeanor matching my cold intensity. "We will secure the perimeter and wait for your command. Nobody leaves that property with any stolen assets. Thank you, everyone. I will see you on the other side of the slaughter." I terminated the video link, the massive screen fading back to opaque black glass. The command had been given. The trap was not just set, the steel jaws were already snapping shut. I left the command center and walked into my massive custom-designed dressing room. It was larger than the entire master bedroom in the Buckhead house. I showered quickly, washing away the sweat from my run, and wrapped myself in a plush silk robe. I did not hire a makeup artist or a hairstylist. I did not need to look like I was attending a lavish social event. I needed to look like an executioner. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe ponytail that pulled the skin of my cheekbones tight. I applied a minimalist, sharp contour to my face and a deep, matte burgundy lipstick that looked almost black in the shadows. I walked over to the center island of the dressing room where my outfit for the day had already been meticulously laid out. It was a custom-tailored charcoal black Tom Ford power suit. The cut was incredibly sharp, featuring highly structured shoulders and a tapered waist that screamed aggressive corporate dominance. I slipped into the crisp, white silk blouse, buttoning it all the way to my throat, and pulled the heavy black blazer over my shoulders. I paired the suit with a set of black patent leather stiletto pumps that sounded like gunshots when I walked across the hardwood floor. I did not wear any jewelry. No earrings, no necklace, and absolutely no wedding ring. I was entirely stripped of the docile, quiet wife persona DeAndre had forced upon me for 7 years. I picked up a thick black leather portfolio from my vanity. Inside were 3 distinct manila folders. The first folder contained DeAndre's immediate termination notice, signed by me as the new chairman of the board, alongside the federal audit detailing his $600,000 theft. The second folder contained the true verified deed to the Buckhead mansion, legally proving my absolute ownership of the property through my blind LLC, accompanied by a 15-minute immediate eviction notice. The third folder contained the bank foreclosure documents for Keisha's new condo and the repossession orders for Sasha's luxury car. 3 perfect devastating bombs loaded into a sleek leather casing. I checked my watch. It was 11:45. 15 minutes until David executed the total financial freeze. Down in Buckhead, Brenda was probably yelling at the caterers to arrange the caviar perfectly. Sasha was probably squeezing herself into an absurdly expensive designer maternity dress. DeAndre was probably standing in front of a mirror, admiring his stolen Italian suit, practicing his fake vice president acceptance speech. They were completely surrounded by their stolen wealth, celebrating the ultimate victory over a woman they thought was crying in a cheap motel room. I grabbed my dark sunglasses, slid them onto my face, and walked back to the private elevator. I stepped inside and hit the button for the underground parking garage. The descent was smooth and silent. I walked past my row of luxury vehicles and unlocked my matte black Mercedes Maybach. I tossed the leather portfolio onto the passenger seat and started the engine. The deep, guttural roar of the V12 engine echoed through the concrete garage. It was time to crash the party. It was time to show DeAndre exactly what a real provider and a real predator actually looked like. The drive from my downtown penthouse to the affluent suburbs of Buckhead took exactly 22 minutes. Traffic on Georgia State Route 400 was exceptionally light, allowing me to cruise in total silence. I kept the windows of the Maybach rolled up, the heavily tinted acoustic glass completely separating me from the humid Atlanta afternoon. As I turned onto the familiar oak-lined street of my estate, the sheer, staggering scale of DeAndre's financial suicide came into full view. He had actually hired a professional valet service. A massive line of luxury sedans, sports utility vehicles, and high-end sports cars stretched all the way down the block, parked bumper to bumper along the manicured lawns of my wealthy neighbors. Women in expensive silk dresses and men in linen suits were walking up the driveway carrying brightly wrapped gifts. I bypassed the valet stand entirely. I pulled my matte black Maybach directly onto the pristine grass near the edge of the property, completely ignoring the frantic waving arms of a young parking attendant. I cut the engine but did not step out, not yet. I picked up my phone and opened the live feed from my hidden security cameras to survey the backyard. The visual was almost comical in its extreme extravagance. The entire rear lawn had been transformed into a grotesque, over-the-top display of fake wealth. A massive, sweeping white canopy tent provided shade for over 200 guests. In the absolute center of the stone patio stood the ridiculous $5,000 ice sculpture, carved into the shape of a life-sized baby carriage, glittering sharply under the afternoon sun. Waiters wearing crisp white tuxedos and black bow ties circulated effortlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. Through the screen, I spotted Brenda. She was holding court right next to the massive caviar bar. She was wearing an obnoxiously large, wide-brimmed sun hat and a floral dress that looked like it belonged in the VIP section of the Kentucky Derby. She was completely surrounded by the most elite judgmental women from her mega-church congregation. I watched as she loudly paraded Sasha around the circle of women like a newly acquired trophy. Sasha was soaking up every single second of the attention. She was poured into a skin-tight blush-pink designer maternity gown that dragged across the expensive stone pavers. She had one hand resting possessively on her baby bump and the other holding a glass of sparkling cider. But it was not her dress or her smug smile that caught my attention. It was what was resting heavily on her collarbone. It was my custom diamond necklace. It was a one-of-a-kind piece I had personally commissioned from a private jeweler in Antwerp 5 years ago to celebrate my very first $10 million corporate acquisition. It was worth more than DeAndre's entire yearly salary. Keisha had not just stolen my designer handbags and shoes. She had systematically raided my hidden jewelry safe and actually gifted my hard-earned diamonds to her brother's mistress. Seeing that necklace against Sasha's skin sent a jolt of pure cold electricity straight down my spine. The absolute audacity was breathtaking. Keisha was standing right next to them holding a glass of champagne and acting like she was born into generational wealth. She was wearing my vintage Chanel sunglasses, bragging loudly to a group of DeAndre's country club friends about the new $1 million midtown condo she had just closed on. They were all completely intoxicated by the fake reality they had built on top of my stolen money. At exactly 1:30 in the afternoon, the tempo of the party shifted. DeAndre walked out of the house and stepped confidently to the center of the patio. He looked incredibly sharp in the charcoal gray Italian suit he had bought with embezzled corporate funds. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter. The live 10-piece jazz band immediately stopped playing. The crowd of 200 high society guests fell completely silent, turning their collective attention to the man of the hour. DeAndre smiled a blinding, perfectly practiced expression of ultimate authority. He reached out and pulled Sasha to his side, wrapping a heavy arm around her waist. He took a microphone from the celebrity event planner standing nearby. "Family, friends, and esteemed colleagues." DeAndre's deep voice boomed over the high-end surround sound speakers scattered throughout the yard. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate the greatest chapter of my life. Looking out at all of you standing in the backyard of this beautiful home that I have worked so incredibly hard to build, I am just overwhelmed with gratitude." A soft murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Brenda pressed a manicured hand to her chest, looking like she was about to weep with sheer pride. "A man's true worth is measured by his ability to provide and protect." DeAndre continued, his tone dripping with toxic arrogance. "For a long time I was carrying dead weight. I was pouring my energy into a situation that gave me absolutely no return on my investment. But a real man knows when to cut his losses and upgrade his life." He paused, letting the insult hang heavily in the air. Several of his close friends chuckled knowingly. He was publicly humiliating me, a woman who was not even there to defend herself, just to score cheap points with his audience. "And then God brought me Sasha," he declared, looking down at the mistress. "A real woman. A woman who understands how to support a king. A woman who is giving me the one thing money cannot buy: a son, an heir to carry on the family legacy." The crowd erupted into loud applause and cheers. Sasha beamed, touching the stolen diamonds on her neck and leaning her head against his shoulder. "But the blessings do not stop there," DeAndre shouted over the applause, holding up his free hand to quiet the crowd. "I am a firm believer that when you step into your true power, the universe rewards you. Many of you know my company is currently undergoing a massive structural acquisition. Well, I received some incredible news from the transition team this week. When the dust settles on Monday morning, I will officially be taking over as the new Vice President of Commercial Real Estate." The backyard absolutely exploded. People were whistling, raising their glasses, and shouting their congratulations. Brenda actually let out a loud shriek of joy, hugging the women next to her. Keisha raised her glass high in the air. DeAndre stood in the center of the patio, soaking in the thunderous applause, completely convinced he was the untouchable master of the universe. He had reached the absolute peak of his hubris. There was nowhere left for him to climb. I kept my eyes locked on the live feed. Right as the applause began to die down and the jazz band picked up a lively new tune, I noticed a subtle shift in the background. The celebrity event planner, a highly strung woman with a clipboard, hurriedly approached DeAndre. She touched his elbow, leaning in to whisper something urgently in his ear. DeAndre's arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He pulled away from Sasha and stepped to the side with the planner. The camera angle was perfect. I could clearly see the planner holding a digital credit card terminal. She swiped a black card through the machine. The screen flashed red. "Declined." DeAndre frowned, clearly annoyed. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket, pulled out his platinum corporate card, and handed it to her. He waved his hand dismissively, clearly, telling her it was just a daily spending limit issue, or a bank security freeze because it was a weekend. The planner swiped the platinum card. The machine processed for 3 agonizing seconds before flashing bright red again. Declined. Error code. Account frozen. Through the high-definition feed, I watched the exact moment the first tiny drop of cold sweat broke out on DeAndre's forehead. He patted his pockets looking for another card. He had none. Every single account tied to his social security number, every corporate expense line, every secret slush fund was currently locked down by the federal government at my exact command. The planner looked at him, her expression shifting from polite deference to sharp professional concern. She had highly paid vendors demanding their final balances before the cake was cut. She needed cash, and the supposed millionaire vice president suddenly had none. DeAndre forced a rigid plastic smile onto his face. He patted the planner on the shoulder and told her he would go inside to his office to make a quick phone call to his bank. He turned his back on the party, walking briskly toward the French doors leading into the living room. His confident swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the stiff, frantic walk of a man who just realized he was standing on quicksand. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat next to the leather portfolio. The timing was absolutely flawless. The financial freeze had hit him right in front of his event planner, cracking the foundation of his perfect day. Now it was time to tear down the rest of the house. I grabbed the portfolio, pushed open the heavy door of the Maybach, and stepped out onto the grass. I adjusted my dark sunglasses and smoothed down the front of my sharp black Tom Ford suit. I did not walk around to the backyard gate to join the party like a normal guest. I walked straight up the wide paved driveway, past the gawking valet attendants, and headed directly for the heavy mahogany front doors. The execution was about to begin. The heavy mahogany front doors of the mansion were propped wide open to let the afternoon breeze circulate through the foyer. I did not knock. I walked straight over the threshold, my stiletto heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floors I had paid to install. The house was filled with the low hum of expensive caterers working in the kitchen, and the distant sound of the jazz band playing on the patio. I walked through the grand living room, the absolute picture of cold, untouchable power in my black Tom Ford suit. Behind me, the execution squad fell into step. There were 3 elite corporate litigators from Wall Street carrying identical heavy leather briefcases, their faces set in grim professional masks. And flanking them were 2 federal agents wearing dark sunglasses and navy blue windbreakers, with the bright yellow letters FBI stamped across the back. We moved as a single terrifying unit, a slow-moving storm front rolling straight through the center of DeAndre's fake billionaire paradise. We reached the open French doors that led out to the massive stone patio. The sheer volume of people in the backyard was staggering. High society women in sundresses and men smoking expensive cigars were mingling around the ridiculous ice sculpture. The caterers were still scrambling, whispering urgently to each other about the declined credit cards, while DeAndre was aggressively tapping his phone near the bar, his face flushed with panic. I stepped out onto the patio. The visual impact of my arrival was instantaneous. The 3 Wall Street lawyers fanned out slightly behind me, while the 2 federal agents took up positions on either side of the French doors, physically blocking the only major exit back into the house. A woman standing near the caviar bar noticed the FBI windbreakers first. She gasped, taking a sudden step back, her crystal flute clinking against the serving table. That sharp sound was enough to draw the attention of the people around her. Like a wave crashing across the yard, the conversation began to die down. Heads turned, eyes widened. The lead singer of the jazz band noticed the sudden shift in the crowd's energy. He looked over the microphone stand, saw the federal agents standing on the patio, and abruptly signaled the band to stop. The lively music cut out with a harsh, discordant scrape of the upright bass. Within 10 seconds, the backyard went from a booming, extravagant celebration to absolute deafening silence. 200 pairs of eyes were completely locked on me. I took off my dark sunglasses and slowly folded them, slipping them into the breast pocket of my blazer. I looked out over the sea of shocked faces, my gaze finally landing directly on DeAndre. He was standing by the temporary outdoor bar, completely frozen. His phone was still pressed halfway to his ear. The arrogant, victorious flush on his face drained away in an instant, replaced by a sickening ashen gray. He looked from my sharp, perfectly tailored suit to the corporate lawyers, and finally to the bright yellow letters on the FBI jackets. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew the financial freeze he had just experienced was not a bank error, but his ego, that massive, fragile structure he had built his entire life around, refused to accept reality in front of an audience. Keisha broke the silence first. She was standing near the ice sculpture wearing my vintage sunglasses, a look of pure, ugly panic twisting her face. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice cracking loudly. "Security, get her out of here. She is trespassing. This is private property." Two large men wearing black polo shirts, hired as private security for the event, stepped forward hesitantly from the edge of the lawn. But before they could even take 2 steps, Agent Reynolds stepped off the patio and held up a federal badge. "Federal agents, stay exactly where you are," Reynolds commanded, his voice booming across the yard with an authority that completely eclipsed DeAndre's earlier speech. Nobody moves. Nobody leaves the premises. The security guards immediately backed away, raising their hands in surrender. A collective murmur of absolute terror rippled through the elite guests. Some women began pulling their husbands toward the back corners of the yard, trying to distance themselves from whatever disaster was unfolding. Brenda pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her massive sun hat knocked slightly askew. She looked completely unhinged, her eyes darting frantically between the federal agents and me. "Zoe," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "What is the meaning of this? You are ruining my grandson's baby shower. Have you lost your absolute mind? You cannot just bring fake police officers to my son's house." I did not even look at Brenda. My eyes remained completely locked on DeAndre. DeAndre swallowed hard. He looked around at the 200 guests watching him. He saw the wealthy church members judging the situation. He saw his country club friends whispering to each other. He realized he was losing control of his narrative on the biggest stage of his life. Desperation forced him into a corner, and like a cornered animal, he attacked. He grabbed the microphone from the microphone stand nearby. He gripped it so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Turn the music back on," DeAndre commanded into the mic, though his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. It sounded thin and reedy. "I apologize for the interruption, everyone. It seems my bitter ex-wife has decided to pull a pathetic stunt because she could not handle being replaced." He forced a harsh, ugly laugh, trying to rally the crowd to his side. He stepped forward, pointing aggressively at me. "Look who came begging for a handout." He sneered into the microphone, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the mansion. "Look at you, Zoe. You really went and rented a suit and hired some actors just to ruin my day. You are pathetic. I gave you 3 days to leave, and instead of taking your cheap clothes and disappearing, you show up here begging for attention. Security. I do not care what fake badges they have. Escort this crazy woman off my property right now." He was actually trying to gaslight a team of federal agents. He was so deeply entrenched in his own lies that he believed he could simply talk his way out of an FBI raid by insulting his wife. I did not raise my voice. I did not need a microphone. I took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward, stopping directly in front of the massive ice sculpture. The cold air radiating off the frozen baby carriage was nothing compared to the absolute ice in my veins. "You seem confused about a few things, DeAndre," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent yard. "First of all, these are not actors. They are federal agents from the Economic Crimes Division. And second, you cannot order security to escort me off this property." I snapped my fingers once, holding my hand out behind me. One of the elite corporate litigators stepped forward instantly, unzipping his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out the thick manila folder containing the property deed and placed it firmly into my outstretched hand. I opened the folder and pulled out the legal document, holding it up so the front row of guests could see the official county seal stamped at the bottom. "You cannot escort me off this property, DeAndre, because you do not own it," I declared, my voice echoing in the dead silence. This $2.5 million estate is legally owned by a blind limited liability corporation registered in the state of Delaware. A corporation that I am the sole proprietor of. You have never owned a single brick of this house. You have been paying the mortgage from your checking account for 7 years, essentially paying me rent to live in my house. A loud gasp erupted from the crowd. Brenda staggered backward, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Sasha, standing frozen near the bar, looked down at her feet, realizing she had been bragging about a house that belonged entirely to the woman she had been mocking. "That is a lie," DeAndre shouted into the microphone, but his voice cracked violently. "I have the prenuptial agreement." Calvin verified it. "You signed the rights away." I pulled the second document from the folder, the heavily scrutinized forensic report detailing the forged signature. "You mean the fake document you and a strip mall lawyer forged 2 days ago?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "The document where you tried to steal assets you did not even own. Agent Reynolds has the federal warrant for aggravated document forgery right there in his pocket. It carries a minimum sentence of 5 years. DeAndre dropped the microphone. It hit the stone patio with a loud electronic squeal that made several guests cover their ears. He took a step backward, bumping into the catering table. The crystal glasses rattled dangerously. He was completely out of ammunition. His entire identity, the rich, powerful provider, the king of the castle, was actively disintegrating in front of his entire social circle. But I was not finished. The property deed and the forgery were just the appetizers. I handed the deed back to the lawyer and pulled out the thickest folder from the leather portfolio. The corporate audit. The absolute kill shot. "And as for your little announcement earlier, DeAndre," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming cold, sharp, and terrifyingly precise. "I heard you tell your guests that you were being promoted to vice president by the new ownership group on Monday. That is a fascinating career trajectory for a man who just embezzled $685,000 from his own commercial development fund." The silence in the yard was so absolute that I could hear the ice sculpture slowly dripping onto the stone pavers. "I watched DeAndre authorize the final $55,000 wire transfer from your corporate account yesterday afternoon," I said, taking another step closer, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. "I watched you wire it to a fake environmental consulting firm. I watched you use it to pay for this absurd party. You literally stole investor capital to buy an ice sculpture and a caviar bar because you were too broke to afford your own lies." DeAndre's mouth opened and closed silently like a fish pulled out of water. He looked at the federal agents, his eyes completely hollow. "How?" He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "How could you possibly know about the wire transfers? The internal servers are locked. Only the new ownership group has that level of clearance." A slow, devastating smile spread across my face. I looked at Brenda, who was hyperventilating, then at Keisha, who was staring at the stolen diamonds around Sasha's neck, and finally back to the broken man standing in front of me. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the termination notice signed in thick black ink. I tossed it onto the catering table right in front of him. "I know about the wire transfers, DeAndre, because I am the new ownership group," I said, delivering the final fatal blow. "I am the silent majority chairman of the private equity firm that just acquired your entire parent company. I am your boss. I own your division. And as of noon today, you are officially terminated for gross financial misconduct." The execution was complete. The king was dead, and he was standing right in the middle of his own ruined kingdom.